The following recording is from the S.A. Essanon International Convention, which took place in Nashville, Tennessee on January 8th of 2010. This YouTube channel is not affiliated in any way with Sexaholics Anonymous. For more information about SA, please go to sa.org.
Hey everybody, my name is Joe. I'm a grateful recovering sexaholic, and I'll be your leader for this session, along with Priscilla, who will be another co-leader. In the spirit of the fifth tradition to carry the message, this session will be recorded. The recorder will not be turned off during this session. If you do not wish to be recorded, you may participate by listening or attend another session. We ask that those who choose to share step up to this microphone so that those who listen to the recording can follow the discussion. Okay, will you please begin with me and join with me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The SA purpose. Sexaholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop lusting and become sexually sober. There are no dues or fees for SA membership. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. SA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sexually sober and to help others achieve sexual sobriety. The guidelines for sharing at this meeting are these. Because our common welfare comes first, here are the guidelines for sharing during this meeting. We do not crosstalk, that is, we share with the group as a whole rather than addressing any individual member. We speak with the I, not the we or you. We leave our identities at the door, including politics, religion, therapies, treatment centers, occupations, or other 12-step issues. We speak about and from the SA point of view. Our meetings focus on the SA approach to recovery, so whenever possible we avoid the mention of titles and authors that are not SA-approved literature. We avoid profanity, sexual descriptions, and sexually abusive language. When sharing strays, we remind each other of our commitment to these guidelines by quickly raising our hands. Our panelists for this session are myself and Priscilla, and we're simply going to share a few minutes in advance with you, and then we'll open the microphone for sharing. At this time, I'll turn the panel over to the microphone over to Priscilla. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Priscilla, and I'm a grateful recovering sexaholic. When I came into SA, I definitely knew my life was unmanageable. There was no doubt in my mind, and I also had figured out that I had no control over my insanity. And yet when I got into the program and they said I had to admit I was powerless over lust, I'm like, ooh, saying I'm powerless means that I can't control things. And I finally was able to do step one, and then they talked about step two, came to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, I'd always believed in a God, but, it's kind of, a faraway God, that did nice things, but I had no real relationship with a higher power. And I've been sober 3 months, and I walked outside to go to work, and I heard a bird sing. And I thought, wow, listen to that bird. And I went, oh, I bet they've been singing before. I just never heard it. And that might sound really flip, but it was just such an awe kind of inspiring thing. And through my life, I'd had some similar experiences that birds had kind of been in my life around important events. And so I thought, maybe there's some connection with a higher power and birds. And so that kind of started making sense. But as I was looking through things for last night, I was reminded of my favorite pages. As a matter of fact, if a sponsee calls or someone else in the program calls and is having some issues, I always refer them to page 60 through pretty much over to 64, 65 in the big book, because it talks about my life. It says, each person is like an actor who wants to run the show. Well, that was me. And if people didn't fit in with what I planned out, I got all upset. And they didn't do exactly what I thought, or the plan got shifted somehow. And when I realized that I didn't have to control, that I couldn't control everything, and that my higher power could, I was kind of like, wow, what a novel thought. And so then the third step kind of came along, that I made a decision, because it seemed to make sense. If I don't and can't control things, maybe a higher power could help me bring things to reality. And what I've found today is, when I get really stressed out, like this morning, I live only about 15 minutes away, and I slept through my alarm, and I woke up at 20 minutes till 8. And the first session was at 8. And before recovery, I would have been so stressed, just rushing around and, gotten here, well, I did kind of get here like that, but have to admit, I am kind of like that. But, it wasn't the angst and anxiety and anger at myself. It's kind of like it was my reality, and it's just a gift of the program that I can take life on today's terms. Whatever happens today happens. I can't fix everything. I just have to do the next right thing. What I have, and I just will kind of close with this, because those of you who are in Nashville know I could talk for the entire hour and probably not take many breaths in between. But I hate to journal. I really just have to be honest with you. I don't like to journal. I know it's a wonderful thing, and my sponsor and my therapist and everybody tell me it's a good thing to do, but I don't very often. But there's a wonderful set of books that people in our program have put together, and they're Step into Action. And it's a great workbook to work through the steps. And I started a book study with one of the women's groups we have here in town, just because we have lots of new women looking to get into recovery. And so I decided it was a good thing for me, good and noble thing for me to, work the steps again. And it's just amazing, because as I sat down, we're getting ready to start step 2. And this has a great set of questions that I started working on this week. And then I also thought, well, I'm going to start doing the inventory like it's suggested in here. And I came up with some amazing things about what my notion of a higher power was. And it's really after 16 years of sobriety. I kind of knew those things vaguely, but looking at it and putting it down on paper made me kind of go, wow, I do have some more things to really look at, and help me kind of continue to grow in this program. So through SA and through working the steps all the time, I keep getting to grow and learn new things. And I'm just very grateful, because when I think back, I mentioned step 2, my first really experience of turning things over to God. I'd been sober about 4 years. I'd done it in my head. But my sister was quite ill and was in the hospital, and I'd been spending pretty much 24 hours a day there. And I had agreed a month or so before to speak to a speakers meeting. And I got there, and occasionally we'd have one of the treatment facilities bring in folks for a meeting. Well, that night they must have had a whole lot of folks in treatment then, because I walked into a room full of about 100 people. And I had literally left the hospital, gone home long enough to take a quick shower. No makeup, I just had on, jeans and a sweatshirt, and just kind of like, God, here I am. And I got up in front of that group, and I thought, God, I just have to turn it over to you. And it was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. to be able just to kind of go, it's whatever comes out of my mouth is coming from God. And so it really does work. If you are just now going through the steps, I can promise you it works. And it works when you keep going back through the steps. So I'll hush and turn it over to Joe. Thanks.
Thanks, Priscilla. Okay, I don't know whether I introduced the topic of the session as at all, but it is Stop Playing God. And, for me, it's easiest, and I'll introduce myself again. I'm sorry, my name is Joe, grateful recovering sexaholic, and by the grace of God in this fellowship, I've been able to be sober one day at a time for the last 5.5 years, and for that I'll never be sufficiently thankful. The fact that I've been coming to SA for 15.5 years would give you some idea that I have some experience in trying to play God, both prior to getting into recovery and during the course of my recovery journey. So for me, I guess I like to draw word pictures a lot of times. It helps me, and so it's rather than saying what does it mean to play God, I like to say what does it look like to play God. That's the experiential aspect. And I thought of an epitaph that I'd heard before that I think is really apropos, and I'll read it. It's found in an old Scottish graveyard in Aberdeen, Scotland. It reads, "Here lies Martin Elginbrod. Have mercy on my soul, Lord God, as I would do if I were God and you were Martin Elginbrod." I think that we chuckle at that because somehow in the human condition we find that we find ourselves making God nastier than ourselves. I don't know why that is, and kind of harken back to in the story of Adam and Eve. Ultimately, their actions were brought about as a result of them feeling like that God somehow was holding out on them. That there is a tendency through our personal experience, I guess, and then to some degree, perhaps through our encounters with religion, to feel like that we blame God to the extent that we acknowledge His power. Then because we have certain expectations that He do things to the way we want them to, then ultimately we find ourselves in an adversarial role. But what does that look like? Well, for me, as in my addictive behavior, I guess it had two things that I remember the most. One was that I felt like I had supernatural powers, one of which was being invisible. As I would found myself routinely going into adult bookstores. I never had any idea that anyone saw me do that. And as I would see people that I knew, because I did this quite often, I would occasionally see people that I knew, upstanding people that I would find doing the same thing, and yet it never occurred to me that I wasn't invisible, and that actually many of the things that I did in my fantasy in my head, I actually was invisible. The other thing that I remember is that in my disease, playing God looked to me like calling out for justice. What I really, really wanted was justice. I wanted to see people get what they deserve. And one of my behaviors, I've spent 30 years picking up prostitutes and spending a great deal of time in adult bookstores, and cruising around looking for prostitutes kind of took on a meaning, life of its own. I found myself doing that hours at a time, and I feel so thankful that in large measure I have I've missed the internet pornography age, and I thank God for that in so many ways. But I can identify with it in that I spent hours and hours in my car cruising around, and I would see prostitutes and not pick them up, because that would be the end of cruising around. That over the hill there was the one that I was really looking for. But as I sat in my car, my mind tended to ponder all of the evil in the world and all of the need for justice. And I remember a specific occasion in specific when I saw a person that I knew that person had done something that was, it really hurt a friend of mine. And I saw him pick up a prostitute. There he was, this fine, upstanding person doing the exact same thing I was doing. And for about 6 months, as I cruised around, I devised this blackmail plan. And I just worked that thing down to the detail, and I knew exactly how I was going to execute this process of extracting the justice that God just wouldn't mete out. That was the way I played God. Those in my disease was demanding justice and thinking I was invisible. As I entered recovery, I unfortunately have found equal opportunities to play God in my course of recovery. I wanted to read from something that Bill Wilson said about finding himself at the first step. He says in Bill's story, he said, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master." And I wanted to, when I read that, thinking about how the realization in step 1 that I was not God, it was still couched in self-pity, as it was, as Bill described. And part of the reason that I was in self-pity when I finally came to realize that lust was my master and it was no longer a friendly master. As it had been. It didn't work anymore for me. But that self-pity, I think, came out of that core of believing that there was no one to pity me, no power to pity me. But the power is the operative word, and at the first step, we realize that we're powerless. And in our topical part in step 2 and 3, step 2 says that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. For me, there's a great distinction mentioned about religion and core beliefs. That if religion might be defined as a set of beliefs that's perhaps generally shared by a group that has to do with the nature and origin of things and has a moral code and associated with it, and in my case, I had such a thing as that. And when I came to step 2, and it said, the path to recovery is came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, I had hope as I came to SA. I saw changes in other people. But all of a sudden, I was very detached from my sense of a higher power. Felt more detached than I ever had, and it really was because, for me, step 2 would have needed to look more like that I came to believe in a power that would restore me. In other words, I had to get that obligation in there so that once again God owed me something. If I did certain things, then I would get certain results. And now I was confronted with the fact that I was totally powerless, totally helpless, and I could see that other people that I had to admit had been through the same things I had been through, were in a different place, and just how could I tap into that power? So the sense of tapping into the power was the thing that shifted me in my thinking and as I began to work the steps away from defining the potential of God as being something that was negotiated between me and Him. And so in the form of an individual person, a person like me, I said, I want what you've got. How did you get it? I found myself saying those same words 10 years later to a friend that I had in the program that I had also knew had been, farting around, for lack of a better term, in the program for about 10 years, as I had, and yet all of us, yet something had changed with him. And so for those of you that the words keep coming back, have a strong meaning to, as they do to me, I kept coming back during all that time, even though I still, at every turn, simply wanted to negotiate a peaceful settlement with God. That was my modus operandi, and it continues to be. Except I'm more aware of that today. So, for me, that surrender, willingness, and surrender as a perpetual mantra are the things that in my experience in recovery have moved me from one step to the next. And step 2 makes that clear statement about coming to believe in a power greater than ourselves, and step 3 about making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. And most of us are very familiar with the 3rd step prayer. But, if you read the 7th step prayer, it really reads just like the 3rd step one. We're just back at it again, asking God to yield ourselves to His will and to be open to do His will. My time in recovery has been a time of learning and change, and a time that I'm so ever so grateful for. First person I met when I fell in face forward into my first meeting in SA was Harvey, and as Harvey spoke last night, I was reflecting on, I've known Harvey now for 15 years, and he says that everybody knows what he's going to say. At the core of the message, that's very, very true. And yet, over time, what surrender to God's will has meant to Harvey, I can see a lot of change in Harvey over that period of time. And I see a lot of change in my outlook. Today I feel like I'm more open to change. That word change, willingness, and surrender. Those are the things that if I keep those in the forefront, if I return to those things, then I'm less likely to be playing God in my program today. So that's my experience, strength, and hope. And we want to save as much time as possible for all of you guys. We've got a big crowd, so anyone who would like to share, come to the podium, and just be sure and give your name before you speak.
I'm Priscilla, and I'm still a sexaholic, and I know that we've just opened it up for y'all to share, I was just thinking of something I read last night in here. It was in the 3rd step, and it said that peace was the direct result of a life where we did not have to be in charge anymore. Brooding, fretting, resenting, and lusting were replaced with a simple responsibility to seek, listen, and follow. And that just really struck with me because my family and I tended to kind of brood and worry, and when I'm willing to turn my life over to God, I can seek my higher power. I can listen to what my higher power has to say and then follow. And it's amazing. To our surprise and delight, we learned daily surrender to a higher power not only relieved the tyranny of sexualism, it manifested in all aspects of our lives. So thanks for letting me add that little bit.
Hi, my name's Eric, and I'm a grateful recovering sexaholic.
Hi, Eric.
When I came to SA 10 and a half years ago, I hated God. I believed in God, but I hated God because I saw this supreme being as a completely untrustworthy being. Who else would give me the strange and weird desires that I have and then put me in a world in which they were not okay? And I'd thought about that for years, and I just absolutely hated that concept, wanted nothing to do with God. But I had reached a point where I had no other options. I was at a point where I would be dead within months if I continued doing the things I was doing. And so I came to SA and I said, I give up. I can't do this on my own. My best thinking has brought me here, so what do I do about that? And the people in SA told me, well, first you have to stop masturbating. And I said, oh, right. I've done that all my life. And then they said, and then you got to go into these steps and start looking at these steps. And I had a lot of trouble with that, but what I'd been doing didn't work, so I started doing it. My wife had left me. I was sitting in our dream house that we had designed and built together, and going through a very hard time. The first 3 weeks were like drug withdrawal from stopping the masturbation and all the drugs that my body creates. And I went through the same kind of symptoms that any drug addict does in trying to withdraw from their drugs. And it took me a few weeks to get clear of those physical effects, and then the emotional and spiritual effects started coming in. And it was one of the hardest times in my life. And there was a time in this was probably about a month later, that I was sitting on the back porch of my house. And our house was in a wetlands area down in Central Florida, and from the back porch we looked out on wilderness. And it was a beautiful place to sit. And I was sitting there on that front porch, on that back porch, just feeling absolutely terrible with myself. And I looked around and I saw this covey of quail go trotting across the backyard. Mother and father, and then about 5 or 6 little chicks, and they just go flitting across the yard. And I looked at that and I said, how beautiful, how marvelous. And here I am, this piece of trash sitting on the porch. And then I watched a couple of cardinals flit through the trees, the red and the little chip chip sound that they make, and again the contrast just threw me for a loop. And I started really looking at the world around me, and I looked at the trees and the individual shapes of the leaves, and I started looking down at the grass at my feet, and I could see the way the edges of the grass were cut by the lawnmower and ragged edges, and I'm looking at that and I'm saying, even this is beautiful. Even these cut grass, every blade is different, and they're all shaped marvelously. And here I am, this pile of dung sitting on the porch that I have absolutely no worth at all. And as I'm looking at the grass, this bug starts crawling across the grass, and this was one of those really big, ugly bugs. This thing was probably about 1.5 inches across when you included its legs, and the legs were these knobbly jointed things that kind of went all over the place, and yet this bug was able to make its way across these grass blades, and each foot would move and find a place, and the bug just kind of confidently moved across the grass. And I'm looking at the beauty of this big, ugly bug, and it suddenly dawned on me, how could the entire world be so beautiful and me not be part of it? And it dawned on me that maybe I could trust God after all, that maybe I was part of the world that He had made, and that maybe the things I was going through really were for good. And since then, I've really taken to heart this idea of quit playing God, to trust in Him, and to do the things that God would have me do. And it comes down to very concrete things today. When I start my work day in the morning, I work at home, I work for myself, and when I start my work day, I look at the list of 7 or 8 things that I've got to do, and I stop and I pray, and I ask God, what do I do? And whatever sense I get, that's the thing that I pick up to do. Even though my own thought might be that this other thing is more urgent, I'll pick up what it is that my sense is that God would have me to do. And when I finish that, I have a sense of accomplishment, and I turn to the remaining 9 or 10 things, because a couple more have come in during the hour I was working on that. And I once again, I ask, what do I do next? And so long as I do that through the day, so long as I take every moment to let God play God, and for me to be surrendered to His will, my recovery works super well. My life works super well. And things happen around me in ways that I can't explain. And I become that ugly bug walking through the grass. And I'm part of God's world instead of trying to do it myself. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
I'm Lisa, sexaholic. When I came into SA and read through the steps, my first inclination was steps 2 and 3 are going to be very easy for me. I had always been in church and always been a very religious person, and had very much been, serving and that kind of thing in my particular practice. So I'm thinking, okay, cool, I can do this. I shared my first step at the meeting, and pretty much half the people in the room that shared about it were like, Lisa, you better be careful. Steps 2 and 3 are going to be very difficult for you. And I was not pleased to hear that, and set out to prove them wrong. And sure enough, steps 2 and 3 kicked me in the rear end, and were very difficult. And most of the time when I find myself struggling with something now, it's that I've got to go back and figure out what it is that I'm trying to play God in, or in my mind, a lot of what I was doing was, for me, God is great, God is good, God will do wonderful things for everyone else. And when I, explained this hypothesis to my sponsor, it was one of those first times when, the question from my sponsor stuck in my head, and God uses it continually of, she said, well, what makes you so special that it doesn't apply? I really thought we could just move on and go on, but she was like, no, write it down. We're going to keep talking about this. And so I'm very thankful for that question, because it keeps coming up. And even, as I continue in my recovery process, when things come up and I figure out, well, why am I still single? Why am I blah, 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 blah. And, very much a lot of times what I have to do is, when I start thinking, well, God is good, but just not for me, well, what makes me so special that doesn't apply? And really start having to think and write through that, and that really helps me to figure out that, okay, here you go, I'm done. So thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Lisa.
My name is David F. I'm a recovering sexaholic.
Hi, David.
I really relate to what was just said about, God being good for everybody else, but not necessarily for me. I too come from a very religious background, active in that religion, and can say I've seen miracles, all sorts of miracles, but I was seeing them in everybody else's lives and not my own. And then, so I began to lose hope a little bit, and step 2 is really hard for me. In the big book, in the chapter We Agnostics, on page 46, it says, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. And I had to change that around a little bit. As soon as I was willing to lay aside my prejudice and unbelief and express a willingness to let God do things for me, I began to get results. And the form that took for me is, there's an old timer in our meetings that very often talks about how his sponsor had him repeat some ridiculous number of times a day, God help me, I'm powerless. And he had to repeat that, I don't remember whether it was 1,000 times a day, something ridiculous. And I wasn't willing to do that. No, I don't have to do that. I believe in God, But finally I said, maybe there's something to that. And kind of my variation on that theme was, whenever a thought would come into my head, I would pray and I would say, I'm powerless over this thought. Please help me. And then I finally got to where I would just say, help. And a funny thing happened, was the thoughts would go away. And I could never do that before. And then, I could never do that. When I let God do it, it worked. And so that real cause and effect helped break down my prejudices against being willing to let God help me. And just another thing I've learned about letting God be in charge, I learned through experiences, through real things that happen in my life, much better than through what somebody tells me, because I'm stubborn that way. I had a day when I had to be in two places at once. Okay, I had to be there. There was no other choice, right? There's always a choice, but I had something going on with a client at work, and then something going on with something related to recovery, and I was supposed to be in both places, and I felt responsibility for both, and I was freaking out. I said, how do I do this? What do I do? What do I do? And finally I just stopped and I said, God, help me to be where you want me to be today. Then my phone rang, and this issue took care of itself. I thought, wow, how does that work? And then I went to where I was supposed to be, and I walked into the room, and there was a great friend of mine who I hadn't seen in 15 years sitting in the room. I said, wow, if I just let God be in charge, life is great. And this is the truth. It's not always that spectacular, but that's what it took for me to learn that lesson. But when I say that prayer, God, help me be where you want me to be today, He does. And I'm grateful for that.
Thanks, David.
I'm still Joe, still a sexaholic.
Hi, Joe.
And one of the things that I had said before about my time in SA, you may mention, what does this look like? And I really didn't describe what it looked like to be trying to play God in recovery. And one of the things that it looked like for me was that during the course of my time in SA, I had 5 sponsors. The changes in who my sponsor was have occurred for a variety of different reasons, but as most of you that are chuckling might suspect, the overwhelming reason tended to be my reluctance to include that person in my recovery. They were always voluntarily willing to assist and share their experience, strength, and hope. But that's one of the things that I knew instinctively was that I was, still trying to be self-reliant and do it myself, and so it played out in the sort of way that I said, how many sponsors do I really need to go through, before I'm willing to take their instructions, which were really not, they were too simple for me. Call me, I had spent most of my thinking about what would redeem me as self-redemption. I mean, I had the idea that, again, my mental picture was me, leaping in front of the railroad track and pitching the child out of the way right before the locomotive hit me and somehow redeeming myself. And so I wasn't there with call me. I had this other thing in mind. So it's amazing how far afield we can be. I just wanted to share that since I didn't put it in the specific term. That was at the core of my failing to really find what I was looking for, was that it was right in front of me, and I just wouldn't allow it.
Hi, I'm Mike, a grateful recovering sexaholic and a very happy sexaholic, and I am glad to be here. I'm glad for this topic because it reminded me of when I first came in this program. I was on a 9-month program. I'm going to be healed in 9 months. I'm not going to need a sponsor. I'm going to get the tools. I'm going to be healed. I'm going to be cured. I'm going to go and be happy, joyous, and free. That didn't work. At first, because my therapist I found out was really, and I realized he was my first sponsor, not knowing it, because I've never felt freer when I told him my story. He gave me 45 minutes, and when we got through, it was an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. When I dumped my life, my pain, and my shame on him. Then I got invited by him, or he demanded, if I wanted to see him again, I had to go to a meeting. Greatest blessing ever happened to me because I finally recognized he meant business. I went to a meeting, and the guy who gave me an orientation, I thought, there's no way I qualify for this program because he is so sick. Why is he walking the streets and he's not in prison? For his story. And found out later he had served time in prison. And through this program, I found out I don't need to be right. In fact, many times I'm wrong. And I can accept that. And when I use and invoke the third step prayer where it says, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. There's a saying in the White Book, surrender my will and my life over to the care of God, as I understand it. And what I've had to do is change that, and God has helped me understand this, is not surrender my life, obey the searchlight of the Spirit and the sunlight of the Spirit of God, and do Thy will. Take the actions, move my feet, do what He tells me to do. Had an experience early on being in a business meeting with about 25 people. I was right, the rest of the people were wrong. We voted. Yes, 24, no, 1, and that was me. I voted against them because I knew I was right. I was really angry. I was resentful. I had enough sense not to make a scene, so I got up, walked out, went out, called my sponsor, didn't answer the phone. Man, that ticked me off. But all of a sudden, I said the third step prayer. Calmness came over and said, the will of God took over the meeting. And you're wrong, Mike. Ever since then, a business meeting or meetings where people go against what I feel is right, they're doing what they think is right. And if I let God into my life, I'm better off. And I'm like Joe, I had a couple sponsors that I wanted to run things past, and so they would agree with me. And I couldn't find one that wouldn't let me off the hook about doing the steps. And working the steps, and I'm glad you mentioned about the steps, because if it wasn't for the steps, I would not be here. I would not have God guide me and direct me in my life. And after the 9 months were up, I working with a sponsor, and so I worked on a 9-year program. And as soon as that 9 years was up, they asked me what I was going to do next, what kind of program I'm going to go on next. And I said, what do you suggest? And they told me 18 years. And I said, well, okay. So I keep coming back because this program has actually saved my life. I never thought I would feel as good as I do today. With my wife, my family. I love my wife. We just celebrated 37 years of marriage together. And I love her more today than I did when I first met her, or married her, or even 2 years ago. I love being with her, whereas I hated to even come home. I look forward to being home and being with her. One last thing. God is doing for me what I could not do for myself. One of the things I found that I'm a miracle. We're all miracles because we walk through these doors of SA. And when we keep coming back, there's a spirit here that helps me want to be a better person. And I know that's God. Also, working the steps I found, and I have forgiven myself because God has forgiven me for some of the actions that I have done. And when I can recognize that God loves me, as bad as I've been, the things that I've done, and still care for me and want me to be a better person, I'm grateful for that, and eternally grateful that God loves me. And I feel that inside me. And you're part of the reason why I do. So keep coming back and obey that spirit that tells you to do the right thing. Because it's like walking up a mountainside. We can walk on the cliff side or we can walk on the safe side. I walk sometimes in the middle because I still want to be right. Sometimes I walk on the edge because somebody's said something or told me something that doesn't agree with me. And when I get on the right side of the mountainside or the safe side where God is, I'm much happier. I'm much freer. And also one last thing, service. Do a lot of service in your fellowship. One of the things that hurts me the most is when we change service of position, it's the same people over and over again. And we ask people to volunteer that have never volunteered and they don't want to raise their hand. There are so many rich blessings from God when you do. I cannot tell you what God has given to me because of it. And if you get turned away and said you can't do a service position or get fired from it like I have, find something else to do. And thank you for this topic, and may we all find that inner spirit and the actions that follow it. Thanks.
My name is Dave. I'm powerless over lust. Actually, my sponsor told me to introduce myself as a sexaholic rather than powerless over lust. So I'm Dave. I'm a sexaholic. Trying to be obedient. It's a great struggle for me. I have really struggled sitting here in this meeting, listening, and I'm thinking that I really have struggled a lot with the second and third step without necessarily realizing it. I'm one of these folks who goes to church a lot and prays a lot and talks about God a lot all over the place and doesn't have any clue how to find any contact with a power sufficient to deliver me from my compulsions to lust and pornography and masturbation. And I think that led me to really doubt whether there is a power great enough. And I tried to find that power through SA, to have SA be that power, because clearly I'm confused about God and higher power and that kind of connection. And for several years that didn't work. I was the perennial SA failure. And left with a lot of doubt, could this work for me? And this past summer I was sitting in a meeting and it occurred to me that maybe my problem was that I just didn't have enough of a therapeutic dose of SA. I got to thinking about medication and how, the medication doesn't work without a therapeutic dose. And then I just wasn't really getting enough SA. I wasn't showing up for enough meetings, showing up on time, sticking around till the meeting was over, reading enough literature. I was kind of dabbling in those things. And that what I needed was to get a sufficient dose of SA to overcome my affliction. And so I made a commitment at that time to try to make it, not to try, just to make it my top priority every day. And I like that because it's simple. I understand it. Every day I can ask myself, well, Dave, what are you doing today? I can just look and see. What am I doing? Not how do I feel today. What am I doing? Who am I calling? What am I doing when I wake up in the morning? And that has been my form, I think, of a third step of turning my will and my life over, is simply every day having my top priority be SA recovery and let everything else go to hell in a bucket. I don't need to do anything else or accomplish anything else or be anything else. None of it. I just don't need to do any of it. If I do anything else, that's a bonus. But today, it's real easy to do my top priority because I woke up here this morning, and I'm glad about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
My My name is John, and I'm a sexaholic. Just to preface what I'm going to say, when my daughters used to be up in their room playing the music a little too loud, I would go up there and ignore the knock rule, just open the door and say, "What are you two up to? Why have you got the music playing so loud? What are you trying to hide?" A few days later, they'd be up there and it'd be real quiet. There again, ignoring the knock rule, I'd just open the door. "How come it's so quiet in here? What are you kids up to?" You know. When I realized that I had to turn my life and my will over to the care of God as I understood Him, I judged Him by me. I was punitive and judgmental. Therefore, I thought God was punitive and judgmental. And I said, how can I possibly, turn anything over to Him? Along the way, through different people, they reinforced in me that I had dignity, that I had value, that I had worth, that God was loving, forgiving, compassionate, understanding, patient, all the things I never was. And as Mike made a mention of, that it takes time. When I came to this program, I was in my 50s. And it took that much time to warp my mind and to mold me and form me into the depraved person I was. 9 days, 9 weeks, 9 months, 9 years didn't do it. I was about my 10th or 11th year before the cobwebs, I could notice they had disappeared. They were starting to dissipate. And I was making some sense to myself. I wasn't that punitive, judgmental person. I cared about people. And I wanted to help other people. And now that's the first thing I say to my sponsees. You have value, you have worth, you have dignity. And the loving God of this program has patience, kindness, gentleness, understanding, forgiveness. Take time to get to know Him. Thank you.
My name is Don. I'm a sexaholic from San Antonio. My new God has gifted me with sobriety in July of 2003. And I say my new God because I believe that for what I've watched, that there is a tremendous advantage, it appears to me, on the We Agnostics chapter of the Big Book. I believe that there's an advantage coming in with hardly any God at all. To not have to unlearn a God that I had learned. 12 years of overly learning and being a slow but total learner, I learned that there's a lady that shared this, everything that I get is from a CD, and when it applies to me, God loves me and I'm going to hell. And that was everything that I learned. That was I could not be good enough to not go to hell. And a person like me will take that to the extreme then. If I can't be good enough to not go to hell, man, I'm going to be really not good. I'm going to be, you don't want to be just a little bit not good. You want to be as good at not good as you can be. And I just did the third step for my 4th time in 6 years. And boy, this popped me in the head like it had not ever before, that we finished on our knees with the with the third step prayer. And then I was told to open up my big book and to write on the inside cover, "Dear Don, you will never ever get your way again. Love, God." And then P.S., if you follow the directions in this book, you will have a very, very plentiful life. And man, did that slap me in the head. And then the last thing I wanted to say was a friend of mine in this program from Portland that calls, we talk almost every day across the country. And so I met him at this convention here in Nashville a year ago. For only my second time of seeing him, but we sat together, and I put everything behind my sobriety. My wife, my children, my job, my church. I didn't say my God, I said my church, and many, many other things. But if I have a threat to my sobriety, it is what several people have said, that we decided that we were the Wright brothers. I'm Orville and he's Wilbur, and I have reserved the right that I'm right. And when Mike was saying 1 out of 25, you can be right if you agree with me, but and I can outshout you, I can out-yell you, I can out-curse you to be right. So that is my jeopardy, is Orville here, Orville Wright. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Steve, and I'm a recovering sexaholic. And I'm not God. When our kids were little, they thought I was really something because they put me on a pedestal and thought I never made mistakes and all this stuff. And they'd never seen me in my pretty bad life. And so when I fail, they fail with me. And it took and really hurt. And that was the first time I fell. Then I fell and fell and fell and fell and fell. And I was thinking about some of the different ones of what they said here, and I listened close. I had a guy in one of the groups that said that if I listen close, God will speak to you through these people. And I said, yeah, wait a minute. These people? And he said, yes. Something you need. Somewhere in a week or two before that or something, they'll say what it's happened to them, and they'll tell you how they got out of it. And if you'll be just listening, and don't get taken turning people off because of whatever, just take and listen, you'll hear you're going to need the next 2 weeks. And wow, and I've heard that happen so many times. It's helped me. And one day somebody said something about they go to God every morning and ask Him to take and help them, not to take and lust or whatever the difficulties they're having. And in the Daily Reflections is an AA prayer meditation book I took and read People, Places, and Things. And I'm addicted to everything. So people, places, and things. That's pretty good. Help me not to lust for people, places, and things. That covers it all. Pretty well all. And that's a real short prayer for me. And I had a few other things that's going on with me and character defects or whatever's right going on there now. And I started that, and I got a lot better. It took about 2 weeks to kick in, but after about 2 weeks, my asking God to help me stop fantasizing, help me stop lusting, help me stop doing it during the day got shorter, less number, and less number, and less number, and I went for several months without a lust thought for person in my mind, and that's because I just keep doing it over and over and over, and. So I thank God that somebody was willing to tell me this. And there was a few other things that I was thinking before I come up here and about God. And like I say, I'm not Him. And I have to remember that. But I had a bunch of different other gods. I thought I was a real good person, let's say that. I went to church and all this, but as I look back, I was a professional hypocrite because I was talking the right talk there and doing my own thing on the other when I walked out the door. And by the way, I don't mind telling my last name, but I just won't tell it over the mic. If you want to know my last name and where I'm from, that's fine. If you want my telephone number, that's fine. And this anonymity bit is okay. But once you get a little sobriety, it's good to take and let somebody know how to get a hold of you. I can't come into Memphis and say I want to talk to Scott or Jim or Joan, and I don't know where he lives. That's who I want to talk to. Okay, well, and or even put his last initial on there. And Bill, as I was starting to say about the thank you, I lost it. I had many different gods, and I didn't think so, but I did. I had a god of lust because I remember cruising the streets and taking and praying to him. I didn't think it was praying to him at that time, but I was. I would take and drive down the street lusting like a crazy, and I said, oh God, or no, I just say, oh, let me see somebody to, I didn't say God at the time, oh, let me see some girl to look at, because I was addicted to female bodies, and I could lust after. And after I look back, that's who I was praying to, my God of lust. So I've had a lot of other gods too. And food was one of my gods, and alcohol was one of my gods, and all this stuff. And every one of them was taking the place of the real God. And I'm just glad that I can do step 1, 2, and 3 on a regular basis every day. And I do it on my character defects, as I do it on everything. And it makes a lot of difference in my life. And after I'd been sober for a while, I've been sober since December 14th of 2002. And after I'd been sober for a while, I said something at a regional meeting about the character defects. And I said I give them up and go through them because that's what a dry drunk in an essay is one that don't work his character defects. That's where I was. I didn't work my character defects, and I was a dry drunk. And I've seen my dry drunks from alcohol, but I didn't put it 2 and 2 together and get at me. And one of the guys afterwards had about 15 years of sobriety. He up and says, I'm a dry drunk in SA, and thanks for pointing it out. And maybe God used me to say something. Maybe she said something. Maybe he said something, or somebody else said something. But don't turn them off just because their hair is the wrong color. They're a female instead of a male, or whatever it is. Just listen. And if they've got a day more sobriety than you are, they've got more sobriety than you. So, and I had one guy tell me last night, and I really enjoyed that, was about sobriety. You know who's got the longest sobriety in here today? First one that woke up.
Thanks to you all for participating. One of the things before we close is say that the theme of the conference is the fellowship of the Spirit. And certainly, as we talk about stop playing God, that's an individual thing, and spirituality winds up being best defined in that statement says, "To thine own self be true." That our enlightened self-interest that we come to understand. It's important to realize that there's a fellowship of recovery and a program of recovery, and the 12 steps is the program of recovery. The fellowship gives us many, many benefits, and the fellowship of the Spirit, to me, I said, what does that look like? And I think about some of the crazy things that I did acting out are nothing compared to some of the crazy things that I have done to seek recovery. In specific, I remember that I had made a commitment that I would wear underwear when I went to sleep, that instead of sleeping naked. My enlightened self-interest told me that would be a good thing to do. So I committed to do that to someone in the program, and as I spent my first night with my underwear in various degrees of on, as I tried to define what it was, what real on really was. That's kind of like is, It occurred to me in the middle of this exercise that it was just me, God, and that. What was I doing? I was trying to negotiate that definition to God. Today, what does that have to do with the fellowship of the Spirit? The number of crazy things that I know the 600 people that are gathered here today are doing in an effort completely out of their character to maintain their conscious contact with God. That's the power of the fellowship and the power that we have to share. Before we close, let's all stand and we'll recite the third step prayer. And if you don't have it memorized, all I can do is read it, guys. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Daily Reprieve, your best source for experience, strength, and hope from the SA members. Please subscribe to this podcast to be alerted of new episodes. Please show your support by donating to the Daily Reprieve by going to donate.thedailyreprieve.com and choose either monthly or a one-time donation. Music was provided by Matt P. Once again, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.